Good afternoon. Welcome to the Top 500 Birds of a Feather session. Before we start, I just would like to express how excited I am to be here again in person with all of you presenting the Top 500 after being absent for 2 years or just being virtually present. So it's so much fun to see you all in real, and so in particular in a session like the Top 500, the real presence is important because we will have the pleasure to hand out the certificates to the winners. And here's our agenda for the session. We'll have the awards, then we will say something about the student cluster competition. Justin Witt from Oak Ridge will talk about the frontier system. I will come back and talk about the exaflop bat, and then we will get a detailed presentation from the 3 colleagues from Oak Ridge who will talk about how they exceeded the exaflop with high-performance LINPACK, and then the always well-received summary of the Top 500 list by Erich Strohmaier. So with this, we will jump right into the awards presentation. And here are the Top 500 awards, and what we will do is we will hand out all these awards, and so as you can see, there are 12 awards. So what we have done this time is not to ask some people to come to the stage 2 or 3 times. We will group these awards and hand out the awards for all the winners in one batch. And so with this in mind, I'd like to welcome and congratulate Oak Ridge National Lab for being the #1 on the Top 500 list. And I think we have representatives from Oak Ridge here who will want to come on the stage to receive this certificate with the 1.0102 exaflop LINPACK performance. And they will also take home 2 other certificates. They are the #2 on the high-performance conjugate gradient benchmark with 14 petaflops, and they are #1 on the high-performance LINPACK MXP, the multi-precision benchmark that is somewhat characteristic of machine learning performance, and they have in that benchmark close to 8 exaflops. So a big round of applause for Frontier and the Oak Ridge team. So next we will come to #2, who is already well known in the Top 500 list. It's the supercomputer Fugaku by Fujitsu, installed at the Riken Center for Computational Science in Kobe in Japan. And Fugaku remained #2 with 442 petaflops on the LINPACK benchmark. And I believe Mitsuhisa Sato is here to receive the award. And he will also take home 2 additional recognitions, being Fugaku being the #1 on the CG benchmark with the best performance there with 16 petaflops, and the #3 on the multi-precision benchmark with 2 exaflops. Congratulations. So next, as to be expected, we will come to the #3 on the Top 500 list, which is the same system that we celebrated already 6 months ago at ISC. It's LUMI, also an HP Cray system that's installed at EuroHPC by CSC in Kajaani in Finland, and it's a consortium of, I believe, of 11 different partners that is involved in this project. Lumi doubled its performance and had doubled its system, and is now continues to be number 3 with 309 petaflops on the impact performance. Lumi also has top placing with high performance CG, where they also number 3 with 3.4 petaflops. And they are number 2 with the multi-precision HPL MXP benchmark with 2.17 exaflops. So congratulations to Lumi and CSC. Okay, now I would like to turn over the microphone to Wu Feng, who will announce the Green 500 winners.
Number 1 is Henri, Lenovo ThinkPad SR670 system at the Flatiron Institute. It is spec'd with the NVIDIA Hopper H100 GPU, the only one that's on the list for the Green 500. We have representatives from the Flatiron Institute. Okay, so number 2 on the list is Frontier TDS from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, achieving nearly 63 gigaflops per watt. And a number 3 is the Dastra, an HPE Cray EX235A system at number 3, and you'll be hearing more about these systems at the Green 500 BOF tomorrow evening. Do we have representatives from Dastra here?
One more. And one more. So next we move on to the SC Student Cluster Competition. This is a competition which is taking place as we speak on the exhibit floor. In the Student Cluster Competition, teams partner with vendors to design and build a small HPC cluster configure and benchmark it, and run a series of real-world scientific applications in the two-day contest. The benchmarks include HPL, HPCG, IO500, and a new one this year, an AI benchmark from MLPerf. During benchmarking, teams are constrained to a 3 kilowatt power limit. And we already have the results for the best student cluster competition HPL score. That was run on a 4 AMD GPU with 128 conventional cores using AMD, consuming just under that 3 kilowatt limit. And they achieved a 117 petaflop score from Much Cash from UCSD. So let's congratulate them and maybe have them stand up if we can. They're way in the back over there. Congratulations to you on winning it, and good luck on the rest of the challenge. And with that, I will turn it over to, it says Justin we've already done that though, is that right? Oh, Justin's going to say some words. I'm sorry, yes. So, Justin, would you like to come up to stage and say a few words about the Frontier machine?
Thanks, Jack. I don't have any prepared materials, but I did want to take a moment just in a spirit of gratitude to express our thanks to, what's a tremendous high-performance computing community in this country. It's been an incredible journey, to bring Frontier to life and make it a reality. This really started, over a decade ago when they did the first exascale feasibility studies. And so it's been in the works for a while. This has been a national aspiration for the U.S. for many, many years. And it's come to fruition through, strong federal investments and strong partnerships with with the U.S. tech industry. And that's truly what's brought Frontier to life. Oak Ridge has been Oak Ridge National Lab has been really proud to be part of this. And just like, I'm certainly not the face of Oak Ridge. I get to come and stand and talk with you, but we have a, huge team at the lab that stands behind me, talented people that make things happen. They perform miracles on a daily basis to bring these large systems to life, and they've been doing it for a very long time. But just as we have that team standing behind us, Oak Ridge has been very proud to be a part of this. But we also have, the community standing behind us. We've had, our sister laboratories standing behind us. And we just have enjoyed tremendous support to make this happen. It's really thousands of people across the national labs, across our vendor partners, HPE and AMD, that have made this possible. Hitting 1.1 exaflops has been truly amazing. I can't tell you how much joy we have in reaching that landmark, but as exciting as that is, what's equally exciting to us is that we already have real science applications that are seeing that kind of performance on Frontier. And we're really looking forward to turning Frontier, putting it into the hands of the researchers early next year and seeing the truly amazing science and the discovery that comes out of that. So again, to all the people that have made this possible, our sponsors at DOE, our close partners at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and AMD, we like to joke, the one lesson from Frontier that we learned is it's really hard to deploy a supercomputer in a pandemic, and without those partnerships, we would have never made it. And so we really appreciate our partners at Hewlett-Packard Enterprises and AMD. We've enjoyed tremendous support from the Oak Ridge National Lab management, our lab director, Thomas Zachariah, our dear colleague and former Associate Lab Director, Jeff Nichols, and our, longtime supporter, Barb Helen at the Department of Energy. They've always had our back through thick and thin, and it's those partnerships that really drive these things forward. And I guess I'd be remiss to not mention this. If you're in the audience and you're at the beginning of your career and you're saying, you're still saying, where's my home? Where am I going to have a career at? And you like to solve hard problems. You like to work on hard-performing teams. Teams that do truly amazing things every day. The national labs, your national labs are hiring. So look us up on the show floor. And again, thank you.
Oops, that went too fast. So now it's my great pleasure to inform you about a 12-year history of the exaflop bet. That was a bet in the year 2010 that my good friend and colleague Thomas Lipper, who is the director of Erich Supercomputing Center, one of the leading supercomputing centers in Europe and certainly in Germany, and I had. And I'd like to say a little bit more about this. Of course, bet is interesting, but it's also a good reflection of the last 10 years of history. And 12 years ago, there was an expectation, if you look at the projection, and this is a slide that was presented in the year 2010 by Erich, and so we will see his 2022 version of the same slide later in this session. You see that there is a very straight line on an exponential scale where you can fit the number 1 and the number 500 and the sum of the top 500 systems. And so if you look at the straight line projection, you see that by 2020, the straight line projection for the number 1 will cross the exaflop barrier. So this was an expectation, just that one could do this in November 2020. And actually in 2010, in preparation to the exaflop project, which became the ECP, there were a number of workshops, and of one of those workshops I've took the slide which says where we were in 2010, what was expected in a 2015 system, and what could be expected in a 2019 system. And so the 2019 system was expected to be an exaflop system with 20 megawatt power consumption and 32 to 64 petabyte of data. And there was also a configuration proposed. So there was an expectation that there might be of the order of 100,000 nodes. And then you can see the parallelism that was projected for 2019 in 2010. So, of course, this didn't exactly turn out this way. And there was actually a DARPA study that Peter Kogi, who's here, headed. He was already with his team predicting that even a simplistic scaling would not get us there from 2010 to 2020. And so there was already some skepticism that these straight line projections would actually work. And so this was a heated discussion that I had with Thomas Lipper. We were invited by the Swiss Supercomputing Center, CSCS, to review. There's our review team enjoying the hospitality of our Swiss colleagues in Zurich. And so at that moment, Thomas and I got into this argument, and I had the DARPA study in mind, and Thomas probably had the projection in mind, and we argued. And we, at that time, said it will be a $2,000 bet and a 2,000 euro bet. And we engaged also in some currency hedging at that point, because this was when there was concern about the euro and the Greek currency. There was some concern that in some of the southern European countries would not stay with the euro, and so Thomas was skeptical, but I was happily betting on the dollar. Anyway, so in this case, the currency hedging was pointless because today that's pretty much an equal 2,000 euro and are equal $2,000. But the bet was there will be by November 2020 no exaflop RMAX system on no HPL impact system in #1 spot of the top 500. And then this was indeed true that by Supercomputing 20, which we unfortunately had to do remotely, there was no exaflop system on the top 500 list with an HPL form. And so Thomas, of course, offered to pay and sent me an email, send me your checking account, I will transfer the money. And I said, no, we're not going to do it this way, and we agreed. He actually raised the amount to 3,000 euro in 2011. We agreed that we will give this as a reward to the group that will actually break the exaflop barrier, and we said that we will give it to the first system that will break this barrier, and the result must be described in a paper or technical report. The authors of the paper will receive the prize, and Jack has agreed to certify the result as a valid LINPACK submission. So this was announced in 2020, and so here we are 2 years later in 22, that Frontier has reached already by June of 22 the exaflop HPL performance, and I'm very proud to say that the 3 colleagues from Oak Ridge have done a wonderful job of summarizing their efforts in a paper. And it was not just the 3 of them, but we wanted to, if you have even a price of 3,000, if you split it with 30 or 40 people, then it's not that much of a price. So 3 was probably a good number. And so what I still would like to do is extract the last paragraph from the paper by the 3 winners. And you can there's a lot of text, but I would like to highlight the things that's bold at the end of this closing paragraph in the paper. While HPL might not be the perfect yardstick for measuring a system's computational potential, it certainly poses a challenging multidimensional optimization problem to be solved under difficult, stressful constraints, as we found in our Frontier exascale effort. And so that's clear. It is a challenge for the team that brings the system into production to run this, and it will also give valuable insights into how to tune the system for performance. And so because of this, we'd like to say congratulations to Scott, Philip, and Christopher. And I'd like to ask my colleague Thomas Lippert to come on stage with the envelopes. And he can also say, here he is, a few words.
I would not like to say so much, but I can say I thank Horst for his great generosity to hand over his winnings to the awardees, and I congratulate them for reaching exaflop first in the world. Thank you.
Please come on stage.
Hi, my name is Scott Etchley. I work in the National Center for Computational Science, and I work on the Oak Ridge Leadership Computing Facility team. For Frontier, I'm the technical project manager, so I'm the senior technical person. But there is a whole army of people, both within the lab and at our vendor partners, HPE and AMD, and this award, this achievement belongs to all of them. Without them, we would not be here tonight. We did write the paper, and we were asked to describe the HPL runs, but we used it a little bit differently than you might expect. So let me talk about, for a few slides here, about what we've done. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of Frontier. Hopefully you're familiar with it and it's not new to you, but we do like to brag. And then I'll talk about HPL as a diagnostic tool, as well as the exascale runs. So Frontier is a HPE Cray EX system. It has 74 cabinets. Each cabinet has 128 nodes, and those nodes have an AMD EPYC CPU and 4 AMD Instinct GPUs. It's 9,408 nodes total. And it has about 9 petabytes of memory, half of that being HBM2E and the other half being DDR4. It has a HPE Slingshot interconnect. For those that are familiar with Slingshot, it's Slingshot 11, so it's first generation switches and NICs. And it has a 700 petabyte Lustre file system. In the center, you see the Olympus cabinet, and I believe you can probably see one over in the HPE booth. These are very large. And they're very dense in power. So each cabinet can provide 400 kilowatts. And the total system, when you add up the 74 cabinets, is just shy of 30 megawatts. And interestingly, it is completely water cooled. So if we did not have the file system in the room, you could go in there and have a conversation, whisper to each other, because it's very, very quiet. You might hear a little pump noise, and that's about it. Some of the challenges that they laid out in the 2008 exascale papers, the biggest one was power. And we could have built an exascale system using components that we used in Jaguar back in the day. We'd have had an issue, though, with power. So if we had tried to build a system back then, it would have required 3 gigawatts of power. And in the DOE, we say that a megawatt is $1 million per year, so that would have been $3 billion per year, so that was not practical. Our next system, Titan, used GPUs, and that became much more efficient, but it still would have required $410 million per year to pay for those 410 megawatts. Summit, which was a hybrid CPU, GPU with hybrid cooling, got much better, but still, with that technology, we would not be able to afford the system. But Frontier, the impressive power efficiency of the AMD CPUs and GPUs and the warm water cooling provided by the Cray EX cabinets allowed us to get below the target of 20 megawatts per exaflop. So we hit 1.1 exaflops using 21 megawatts of power, and so that puts us right at 19. And so they hit that target. A single cabinet of Frontier or the Frontier TDS, which is a single cabinet standalone system, has 10% more LINPACK performance than all of Titan did. Titan took 7 megawatts to achieve that, and that single cabinet uses 309 kilowatts. So it's a huge, huge improvement in power efficiency. So when you're standing up a system like this, you have a huge problem. There's just so many components. We have millions and millions of components in a system this size, and you have to shake the system out. You have to find the marginal hardware, and we did so with the help of HPE. So Nick Dubé, who might be here in the audience tonight, his team put together a diagnostic tool, and this represents all of the cabinets in Frontier. And each of the little dots is one of the nodes. And Nick implemented a testing routine that would stress this system 24 hours a day. And it used HPL as its primary measuring stick, but it also used things like stream and some MPI benchmarks, that we were hitting all the components of the system, but HPL was the big part of it. And so the different colors represented where that node was. If it was completely dark, it was powered down. If it was light gray, it was powered up, but no test running. And then once the test started running, then you got the different colors. So green meant that it was passing its single node performance, and blue meant that a full cabinet was passing its single node. This is all HPL that he's reporting here. He had other dashboards to look at thermals, look at GPU temperatures, GPU memory temperatures, CPU memory temperatures, and so forth. But this was the one that we watched on a daily basis to see the progress of the machine coming together. And as we started making more progress, more cabinets came online and went green and then blue. Blue was good. And then once they started running multi-cabinet HPL, then the colors changed to pink and purple. And so we could just, at any time, pull this up and see how things were going on Frontier. And we knew things were going well when the lights started to flicker. So we also, and this was a huge, using this tool to help shake out a system is very, very important. But then once you've got the system in a steady state, then you want to try to tune for performance. And so this effort went on for several weeks. And we don't normally see output of HPL while it's running to understand if it's doing well or not, but we watch the power. And so this is a power profile from when Summit, our previous #1 machine, which is still in production today, made its HPL run back in 2018. And the thing to focus on is the red, the dark red line, and that is the power during the HPL run. And so a classic HPL profile is it immediately jumps up to full power, has a plateau for about 2/3 of the run, and then as the remaining work starts to dwindle, then you see the dip and the tail at the end, and then at the very end you see that drop. And that's a very classic profile for HPL, and that's something that we've noted on systems before. And so this is what we were looking for when we started doing large runs on HPL. That is not what we saw. What we saw was this strange graph. First of all, there's no plateau. You had this triangular power shape, and the power was oscillating wildly. And so from the top of that spike to the bottom of the spike is about anywhere from a 4 to about an 8 megawatt swing in the time of about a minute. And so it was oscillating wildly. And this just bedeviled us for the longest time. And the other thing that we saw that we've never seen on a system before, if you look down in the lower right corner, is that spike, and that's the backsolve. And we never had the resolution in the power monitoring before to ever see this. This lasts for just a few seconds, but it jumps up dramatically. And when you're watching one of these runs and you get down to that bottom, you want to, you're expecting an answer to come out, and all of a sudden you don't see that spike and it's dead, and you ran for 2 hours or 3 hours and it died in the last 2 seconds or something like that. We didn't know what to make of this. The performance was poor. And this particular run, this is the first run that we submitted to the TOP500. It was a 614 petaflop run. But we had been fighting this unusual behavior for weeks and just could not figure out what was going on. We knew it wasn't right, but we just could not put our finger on it. I should back up. Before we even started the runs, excuse me, HPE had 2 different teams working on HPL. They had AMD doing all the single node optimizations, and then the HPE team, the Slingshot team, and the MPI team were doing the scaling work. They would take the baseline HPL from AMD, add some proprietary optimizations. They added ORNL staff to both teams. The staff from ORNL that helped with the on-node were the teams that did the HPL MXP runs, and they shared their experiences with that. And then Phil, Chris, and I were on the scaling team helping them out. but we were also constrained in that, a lot of the things in the scaling effort was proprietary to HPE. We met daily to share results, to suggest optimizations, and to propose theories as to what was going on with the behavior. And this effort was going on for weeks, and there was a lot of frustration. After, as the deadline approached, and without understanding what was going on, HPE made the decision to merge the teams. And we brainstormed, what would we do next? What experiments could we run? And were there any other requests that we had that might be beneficial? And one of those requests was we needed more detailed profiling on a subset of nodes. And this is a brand new machine. The software stack is still maturing. It was difficult to get the profiles. We didn't have a fully functioning file system to work with, so it was just a challenge. So the AMD staff worked with the HPE staff to collect this data and show them how to do it in a way that was scalable and performant. And the HPE team then went and took that knowledge and gathered some profiles that night and shared those with us the next day. This was the first aha moment. So Phil on our team plotted the time in PDFact, and he plotted it by rank. And as you can see, the low ranks perform, the time in that function is very low. The ranks at the end, the time was very high. And this generated a lot of excitement during our daily call. Lots of theories just sprang forth, and a couple people suggested it looks like you might have a linear lookup somewhere in the code. It's not in HPL. Kim McMahon from the MPI team said, I can guarantee you we don't do any linear data structures in MPI. But she said, let me make a call. And so during that call, before it ended, Kim came back online and said, we may have found it. So MPI on Cray is layered on top of libfabric. And libfabric has the ability to tell you who sent you a message. Basically, think of caller ID. It's not necessary in MPI. MPI already encodes the sender's ID in it. So this is redundant information. And if you read the man page for this function in the libfabric library, it says it may come with a performance penalty. And oh boy, did it. So they were able to immediately make a version of MPI that said, we don't want that feature, we don't need that feature. And they started to run. So that night, HPE took the reins of the machine and started running. They'd launch a job, it would run for a couple hours, you're waiting for the back solve, and it would crash. Or they'd launch a job, it'd run for a few minutes, and then it would crash. And so this was going on all night. I was feeding them the power numbers as they were happening. And about 3 in the morning, we had a run complete. And I sent an email to our lab director at 4:24, thinking that I'd give him some good news when he woke up in the morning to say, hey, we found the issue, we've got line of sight, we think we can do it. He replied all of 15 minutes later to say, congratulations. So the next day, the team went back to bluing up the machine, right? So we pounded overnight, some of the nodes fall out. So they do any hardware repair actions they had to do, and they got it ready to go, and they turned the machine back over to the HPL team, and we started the process again, and it was a frustrating night because it would run for 2 hours and then die, and then it would run for an hour, then die. And so after about, 1 a.m., I said, I'm going to take a nap and set an alarm for 2 hours and get up and check again. And at 3 a.m., it had failed, and Steve, who was running the test or running the benchmarks that night, had an aha. This was the second aha. So he'd realized there's a couple different tunings that HPE puts into the code, and the relationship mattered. I'll just call these A and B. If A was greater than B, if A was less than B, it always failed. He went back and looked at 2 or 3 weeks worth of runs and realized that was always a bad combination. But if it was equal to or larger than B. Well, it still might fail, right? It's a new machine, nodes fall out, jobs crash, but sometimes it might succeed. And he was able to do that in the span of a minute, in 5 minutes, 10 minutes after that last crash, and realized he had already run those settings and made the connection. And so he set A equal to B, and it ran. And it ran 2.5 hours, and we had 40, maybe 50 people around the world watching. And we all held our breath, and it finished. We saw the spike, and then we got the result. And then there was a lot of celebration. So this is what the final power profile looked like. You see it has the classic profile. You see some dips in there, and those are things that we still care about, but it didn't hurt the overall performance, and there's the result that came out at the end. It was a fantastic team effort, and would not have been possible. But HPL is not the only thing that we've run on the machine. As you saw earlier, the number 1 and 2 was from back in May on the Green 500. Number 1, and again, it's been updated since then on the HPL MXP. We have 2 Gordon Bell finalists, one from Berkeley, one from Oak Ridge. We have 2 ECP applications that exceeded their 50x performance targets. WarpX has achieved 110x speed up over Titan, and Exasky has achieved over 270 x improvement over Titan. And it will be entering production in January. And again, this is due to the efforts of our team and using HPL as a way to cure the machine. And there was a huge army of people. HPE brought the army to stand up the machine, to repair the machine, to blue up the machine during the days. The HPL team was led from HPE by Joe Glensky and Steve Whalen, John Barron, Chow Lang, Kim McMahon, Kevin McMahon, Michael Locke. HPE had numerous people helping under Noel Chalmers' direction. We appreciate all the insights that Al, who has done many of these systems over the years. We reached out to Jack and Peter at UT, at ICL, to ask for insights and had they ever seen anything like this before. And then we also like to thank our coworkers who did all the HPL MXP work, Hal Liu, Mike Matheson, and Wayne Joubert. This effort was truly a team effort. We graciously, humbly accept this on their behalf, and thank you very much.
So thank you, Scott, for that very thrilling tale of what you can do with HPL, which many people probably don't realize or ever do or ever dream of. Thank you very much for coming and for sticking around. It is my pleasure now to give you some of the highlights of the latest list, which was officially published yesterday. And in particular, I'm going to show you a couple of things. I'm going to come back to the various top 10 lists we are collecting, the various data we are collecting. If this comes back. And after that, after the top 10, brief glimpse at all the top 10 of the various benchmarks, I'm going to talk a little bit and show you some graphs about how the content of the top 500, the structure or the components, what it reflects and what it looks internally actually has changed over time, because that's becoming very important in terms of how we look at the data and how we interpret the data. I'm going to look at, after that, I'm going to look at some of the more traditional statistics where systems are installed and where they are produced. But because of the aging of the list, I'm going to show statistics, I put a different spin on it, and I'm going to show you a particular breakdown of what happened in the last year. So I'm going to look only at the system for some of the slides, only at the system, 80 systems which have been installed the last year, and look at what the market actually did last year instead of just at the top 500 overall. And at the end, I like to come back to a story I have told here a couple of times already and revisit it, and that is the signs we have seen in the last couple of years, in the last 5 years, of a further slowdown of performance growth in the market and in the installed system, and what that might mean for us in the future. So with that, this is the top 10 of the top 500, ranked by the HPL performance by Jack's Limpec benchmark. And in yellow, traditionally, we color all the changes in the top 10. The number 1 system, of course, is the Frontier system, the first and still the only exascale system which we know of, which has submitted an HPL run. The number 2 system, Fugaku, has been on the list a little long. It has been the number 1 before. It's now number 2. Followed by Lumi, a system installed in Europe, in Finland, installed by the Euro HPC consortium. And they doubled their system size relative to June. And with that, we're also able to roughly double the Olympic performance, which allowed them to remain at the number 3 spot. Otherwise, they wouldn't have fallen down the list. Because number 4 spot is a new system. It's also installed by the same consortium, the Euro HPC consortium, but in a very different location. It's in Bologna in Italy at the Cineca Center. It's also a very different system, Leonardo. Leonardo is based on the Atos Pulsicana architecture and not on the HP Gray EX architecture like Lumi. So Leonardo is the only true new system in the top 10, coming in at number 4, while the other systems have been on the list before and are of various ages and architectures. So with that, of course, you know, we have been collecting performance data for other benchmarks as well, and the HP conjugate gradient CG benchmark Czech and Mike Carew pioneered is the second big benchmark we are collecting data for. So these are the top 10 systems which have submitted an HPCG score. It's in the first numerics column towards the right. And you see that Frontier in this particular listing is actually not the number 1. Even though it got close to the level of performance of the Fugaku system, the Fugaku system is still the number 1 system on the HPCG benchmark. That is a reflection of the different architectures of the systems, as well as a reflection of the different requirements of the different benchmarks. The HPCG benchmark requires a lot more data movement, is much more demanding in terms of data movement, and Fugaku as a custom designed system without a detached accelerator is much more tightly integrated, and because of that, I can achieve on such codes higher efficiencies than other architectures. So Fugaku stayed at number 1 on that system. Frontier is marked yellow, because what Scott didn't tell you is that with all the excitement about the HPL run, they didn't get to running HPCG in time for the June list, so that they never gave us a number in June. So it's the first time we actually see a number for the Frontier system. That's why it's in yellow. The Lumi numbers have improved as the system has improved, and Leonardo entered this list at position number 5, behind Summit, which again reflects differences in architectures and things like that it couldn't overtake Summit in this particular listing. So the third big benchmark we are tracking the last couple of years is more of an experimental benchmark, and it's the one formerly known as HPL AI, which was rebranded as MXP. MXP is short for mixed precision, and it's much more to the point of what the benchmark actually does, because it's really a prototype for a mixed precision algorithm in linear algebra or in scientific computing in general. AI, there is even the question if AI needs something like 64-bit floating points or anything like that. But HPL MXP certainly does. It's really mixed precision. You can't get away just with 16-bit. And you won't achieve these levels of performance with just 64-bit arithmetic either. You see the names, the top 5 systems, the same as on the top 500 again, but again, a slightly different arrangement of the systems, which is a reflection of the different requirements of the benchmarks as well as the architectures. The one thing to notice, of course, is in that relevant column where you see the benchmarks numbers, they look a lot higher than the traditional HPL or especially the HPCG numbers, with up to almost 8 exaflops, And we noticed that, of course, a lot of people in industry like those numbers because they can show exaflop much more easily if they run an AI benchmark. So take that with a grain of salt. But the important thing to notice is what that is the machine actually didn't perform 7.9 exaflop in terms of performance, but it ran at a speed, it solved the problem at a speed where you would need in full precision a 7.9 exaflop computer system. So that's what that number means. And with that, basically, that is a number no system on Earth could produce at this point, and that shows the validity and the benefit of this type of computation, mixed precision computations. We already talked about the Green 500. Green 500 is a bit different than the other lists I just showed you. All the other lists are based on size of a system combined with efficiency. The Green 500 is solely based on efficiency, in this case, energy efficiency of computation. It doesn't really take the size of a system into account. That's why small systems can rank very high, typically do rank higher than larger systems. And that's why we also have, because it's a technology list and not so much a big installation list, that's why we have a lot of turnover in the Green 500 from one edition to the next in the list. So you see 6 yellow systems and 2 upgrades. So there is a lot more changes in that list. The number 1 system is special and came a little bit out of the left field for us, the Lenovo Think system. It is very, very power efficient, and the one thing we noticed is it's the first and only system which is using the NVIDIA H100 accelerator. And the open question, of course, is that related to its high power efficiency or not? And if you want to hear more about that, tomorrow at the same time is the Green 500 session. There's going to be more detailed discussion of all these aspects for the Green 500 here. The one thing which hasn't changed, which we have highlighted a couple of times, is all the systems on this list have accelerators. That seems to be, for a while now, the best way, if not the only way, to achieve high energy efficiency, and that hasn't changed. So that remains the same. And with that, I like to switch over and look more at the top 500 in general now. And by that, I mean look at what actually changed with the top 500 in overall. So one of the first things is how many new systems did we actually have? It was only 40. It was 39 in June. So overall, if you compare that to history, that's very little. Used to be at least half of the system was eliminated. 200 systems were eliminated every time, every 6 months, just because new systems put into the list. That has totally changed. There's a lot fewer systems are being installed and being reported to the list. And that has been systematic and has reached quite a quite a, I wouldn't say extreme situation. What that means is the average age, of course, of the systems on the list has to increase because there are much fewer coming in. And the question is that really a reflection of what happened or not? The other thing to look at is actually how much performance comes in. Is it only the small systems not getting replaced? Is it big systems not getting replaced? And if you look at that, you see like 6 months ago, there was a big jump. There was Frontier pushing into the list and the first installation of Lumi. But even with some upgrades in the top 10 this time, there was only 7.5% new performance added to the list. That's a record low turnover in the list in terms of performance. So there is a lack of turnover in terms of numbers. There's a lack of turnover in terms of performance as well. I can look at the age of the system. We keep track from the first installation till they're decommissioned, how old the systems are on average. And the average age of a system is now 2.5 years. That's much older than the 7.6 months we used to have. We are at 2.5 years, and that's the average. So there are much older systems in the list. And that is also important because it also means those systems, we don't only install fewer new systems, but we keep the ones we have actually running longer. Because if you decommission a system, we ask people to report that as well. We take those systems off. And people don't seem to decommission systems in great numbers either. They just keep running them longer. That's why they're older. And the side effect of that is, in our opinion, or my opinion, that centers, especially some on government funding, can actually save the money if they delay their procurement and then spend more money on the new system. So for a while we saw systems getting overly large, the new systems, while the existing systems aged longer. And that seemed to have happened in two phases. I also looked at how many systems you actually need to accumulate half of what the shape of the top 500 is in terms of a distribution. And one of the simplest measures is to ask, where do you accumulate half of the total performance in that list? So that's basically the rank you need for half of the total list. Used to be around 40, 50 positions. It has declined, is now a record low of 8 positions. So you only need the first 8 positions, 8 systems on the top 10 to accumulate half the total performance in the top 500. And if we had reports, numbers for those rumored Chinese systems which would be in the top 10, that situation might actually be more extreme. We might even need less than 8 to accumulate half the performance. So there's definitely a focusing going on the very high end. The large systems tend to get larger, and the small systems, they don't know what they do. They just don't seem to keep up. So with that, a couple of slides about traditional statistics. Here's the statistics according to where systems are installed, and this is the full top 500. So you see China, there's still a third of the systems are installed in China. A quarter is installed in the United States, and then various European and Asian countries following that. And we have reported about that, but the Chinese situation is much more complex. That becomes very clear if you look only, for instance, only in the systems which have entered the list the last 12 months. So this is the 80 systems which entered the list in the last 12 months. On the left-hand side, you see the statistics by number of systems. On the right-hand side, you see it by aggregate performance. So we weigh it by the size of the system. And you see the number of systems which entered the list is actually almost half, 44% in Europe, a third in the US, and only 15% in Asia. And if I would break that down, China wouldn't be number 1 or 2, it would be only the number 3 country in Asia. So there is very few systems in China, installed in China, being reported. That's been going on for 2 years. All the reported systems we know of have been reported mostly in Europe and to some degree in North America. In terms of performance, if you take the right pie chart, performance is always very influenced, especially nowadays, because we are so top-heavy by the very big machines. You see the impact of Frontier as well as Lumi and Leonardo. That blows up the slice, the North American slice, to 2/3 of the new incoming performance, and the European slice about 25%, 26% of incoming performance. So that looks very different from what's in the list, but those are only the new systems. You have to be a little careful. For instance, the Japanese slice in performance is very small here. That's because Fugaku is about 3 years old, so it doesn't show up in these statistics here. This is only what happened last year. Where have these systems been produced? Where are the companies which produce systems? And I was a little surprised to see that actually 55% of systems which came in the last year in the list are produced in China. So Chinese are building systems, they are selling them, and if you look in that slice, more carefully into that slice, that's basically exclusively Lenovo systems sold outside of China. So those are Lenovo systems sold dominantly in Europe. That's why there are so many new systems in Europe. That's why the Chinese slice in terms of number of systems is still very high. So outside of China, the market is open enough, transparent enough, and competitive enough that the Chinese competitors are actually publishing their numbers. That's why we see them here, but otherwise we don't. If you look at performance, of course, we see the influence of the big systems, and we see that most of the performance was installed in the US, and a big slice of that was not just HPE, but Frontier in particular, but HPE in general. That is actually the blue slice. If I draw this slide down into companies, it becomes even simpler. The US slice, the blue slice, is basically in terms of performance, the right pie chart. The 82% is almost exclusively HPE. In Europe, in terms of performance is almost exclusively Atos, and in China it's exclusively Lenovo. It's only 3 companies which really have sold in big systems the last year. If you look in terms of number of systems, there is Meuer, which sold a good number of systems in Europe, but not as big, not nearly as big as Atos. So with that, I look back at the list overall, what we actually see in there, and there it looks, if you just naively look at all 500, you see all the old systems looks very different. Lenovo would be ahead of HPE in terms of number of systems, followed by Inchpur, Shugon, and Atos. That is a reflection of what's in the market, what's fielded, what we know of. It's not a reflection of what happened last year. And in terms of performance, there would be a similar change. It would highlight some of the older systems. In this particular pie chart, around the 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock mark, you see the Fujitsu slice, that's the Fugaku system. So in that respect, that is more reflective of what's out there. But in terms of the Chinese systems, you have to take these slices with a little bit of a grain of salt. Okay, coming back to what happened last year, it's again 2 more slides about just in terms of technology, what the systems we fielded the last year, what those look like. You see the CPUs on this slide, and then the GPUs are the accelerators in the next slide. You see in terms of number of systems, it's actually Intel 60%, AMD 36% as main processor. That looked like it was going to be 50-50 in June. Was 50-50. The reason that Intel bumped up here again is the Lenovo systems, because they're based on Intel processors. So in terms of number of systems, Intel ahead of AMD. In terms of performance, the right-hand slide, AMD, of course, clearly ahead of Intel. But if we talk about performance, we really should not look at the CPU so much as we should look at the GPUs, which is the next slide. So this is in terms of how much performance the different categories contribute. And you see in terms of number of systems, the commercial systems still don't use, most of them don't use GPUs. So they use no co-processors, no accelerators, that's the green slice. But if you look at performance, you see the AMD GPU, in particular because of the HPE products, were the dominant accelerator last year. But the NVIDIA slice, of course, stays there. And 1 year is probably not quite enough to look back because it doesn't cover enough product cycles. I would probably expect if I had done 2 years, it might look a little more balanced, but it was the first try. Okay, so with that, I like to come back and look at performance development over time, as we have done in the past. And you have seen different versions of this slide. Again, I'm not going to show the old version. This is one of the last ones. You see the current performance levels. The list overall has 4.8, 4.9 exaflops. 1.1 is our leader, and you need 1.73 petaflops to actually enter the list. We have seen inflection points in the list, which first showed up at the end of the list in June 2008, and later in June 2013. And we have a whole story about that is a reflection of the end of the NAR scaling, which happened actually in 2004. It was delayed because we delayed our procurement cycles till the new systems were enticing enough for us to actually spend the money. And when we spent the money, we spent more money. We bought bigger systems. That helped us overall stay on the growth curve. But it is basically something you can only do once, and once it plays through, then all the levels of performance in the top 500 fall back on that new growth rate. So we had seen since 2013 the effects of the end of the NAR scaling, and there was no masking it anymore by buying bigger machines. The important thing here, however, was, and that took us a while to understand, is while that inflection, while it showed up at the end of the list first, and based on that observation, I actually thought, what actually happens if you look at the end of the list and only focus on that line? Do we see something else? So here, what in the last graph showed the new growth curve since 2009, since the end of the NAR scaling. What we see here is that the end of the list actually has clearly another inflection point around 2017. And since 2017, the end of the list has grown even slower than before. The question is why? Has to have different reasons than before. And it's a different growth rate. It's it's quite a substantial difference on these logarithmic scales. So what we did is we collect all kind of information about the systems as much as we can actually maintain. We tried some variables which I really liked, like memory and stuff like that, which we couldn't maintain, so we don't have good data. But we have a lot of other data, in particular about the processes, the node sizes, the cores per node, the nodes in the system, and so on and so forth. And I just dug around trying to find a correlation, trying to find a needle in the haystack, which would tell me why since 2017 performance does not grow as quickly as before. And the best correlation we found was actually with the average number of cores in the system. So this is not cores per chip, this is cores in the total system you have. And roughly, I already colored it suggestively. There are four periods. At the very beginning, there is a couple of odd lists, which were SIND-based lists, where we had thinking machines. They followed their own laws, but they disappeared in the middle of the 90s. And then from middle of the 90s till 2004, we had a steady growth of the number of cores in our systems, but all those processes were single core processes in essence. So we had what we see here is the increasing number of nodes in the system, because the nodes tended to have only one or at most two processes. So up to 2004, we see an increasing number of nodes in the system. 2004, the end of the NAR scaling hit, and we start putting more processors on our chips. We having many and multi and many core chips. And with that, the number of cores in our system starts growing much faster than before, because now we grow our system sizes by number of nodes, and we grow the number of cores within a node. So that is a growth which was much higher and lasted up to 2017. That's my smoking gun. That's when performance in the top 500 all of a sudden starts lagging again, and that's when the number of cores in the global system all of a sudden doesn't keep up anymore. And that growth rate in the number of cores in our whole systems since 2017 is even slower than the number of growth, the growth rate for the number of cores we had before 2004. So that tells me two things. Basically, it needs to be more than one factor. It needs to be something which limits the growth in number of cores per chip, but there needs to be a second factor where we have hit the wall, that we can no longer grow the number of nodes in our systems as fast as we did before. There had to be a macro-physical limitation as well. These inflection points on these growth curves, they tend to be sharp because you basically, exponential growth cannot be maintained indefinitely. You always run very quickly. You come to a very quick end in exponential growth when you run out of something to grow on, your substrate, your space, or whatever. And that has happened. So we have hit probably two boundaries in 2017. It's a conjecture, I can't prove it. But one is probably the end of Moore's law, that we can no longer increase the number of components on our chips as quickly as before. That limits our growth rates, how many cores we add to our chips. And the second one is actually macrophysically, that on the level of the machines and facilities, we can no longer afford building larger systems and more power-consuming systems. That there is a second limiter in terms of growth in the top 500. So, and Jack alluded to this. Of course, what I like to do is naively go back to my original slide with the exponential growth rate and just take the new rate I just declared exists for the last 6 years and 5 years and project it out into the future. So what you see here is basically the naive extrapolation of that exponential growth, but with that growth rate which we have seen in the list since 2017. So the old rule of thumb in the top 500 in the community was that we get a factor of 1,000 improvement in terms of performance every 11 years. That was something which held very well for 2.5 decades. So we were very used to that. That started breaking down 2008, and now it really broke down. And if you look at the red curve and compare 2020 and 2030, you see that in 10 years we can expect even less than a factor of 10, slightly less than a factor of 10, if this continues. So the growth we see in the market reflected in the top 500 is much smaller than it used to be. which has all kind of implications for buying behavior, for market behavior, and all those things. The scary point for me is if I really look carefully, I see that that red line is convex. It's curved the wrong way, so it seems to slow down even further. But that is probably, yeah, let's hope that's not the case, because otherwise we might actually end up stagnating after all totally, and that's not something I would like to deal with in the top 500 very easily. Anyway, with that, thank you very much. Here is the summary of the points we just had. And we want to have a Q&A now. So we have 2 microphones in the walkways. And if you could raise the light a little, thank you. Are there questions? Or comments?
I'll go for it. All right. I want to thank the speakers today. Thanks, Scott. Great talk. I still think about that May 27th. It's 6:15 in the morning, and I'm still emotional about it. Jack, also, thanks for the great talk this morning. I'd like to bring a data point maybe to your attention. Remember when the CPUs started overclocking over their base clock? We had amazing system efficiency. And it wasn't so much because the fabric was spectacular. It was because the node performance was about above 100% to kind of get going. So the comment you had this morning, question mark, is the fabric on Frontier capable enough? Now, this is not an argument for me making, I think we need to build better interconnects for our system. That's all great. However, the data I would bring you to your attention is that if you look at Frontier's individual node performance, it's about % of peak. It's about around 100. If you run LenPack single nodes, around 145, 150 teraflops. And if you look at Scott's run, what's in the flat portion of the exascale run, it's right at 1.4 exaflop, which matches basically, it was 9218 times 145, 150, which indicates that there was actually no fabric contention there. And I would suggest to you guys that instead of calculating the LinPack efficiency based on peak, which is kind of artificial, we should calculate it based on number of nodes times node performance. Now you calculate the LinPack efficiency. And if you do that on Frontier, you actually see that the fabric on Frontier is 85% efficient. I'd love to hear you guys comment on that.
So I would have to look at that a little closer, Nick, to really understand what we're talking about here. So you're saying that, say it again, just give me the snapshot of the comment.
Basically, instead of calculating efficiency on peak, which is a mathematical number, calculate it on the single node LenPack performance multiplied by the number of nodes.
I got it, yeah.
You do that, Frontier is not 65% efficient, it's 80. It's like 83, 85% efficient. I think that'd be a better measure of efficiency for large systems.
I see the point, yeah.
Scaling efficiency, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good, reasonable point, okay. Yeah, weak scalar efficiency, yeah.
I think we have another question.
Yeah, one more question. As a representative from industry, although that probably hits you in government and academia too, one of the big drivers for Moore's law was the exponential decrease of cost per component. Have you looked at that data too? If you look at the big systems, what does it cost per usable flop? Has that decrease also ended? Which would have big implications, right? So all of a sudden, instead of just waiting a couple of years, we actually have to pay more money for getting more compute. What a concept.
Yes, cost per flop.
Should I?
Go ahead.
So it's probably, if I would put together a list of most asked questions or most wanted features, it would be in the top 3 that we track cost. And we have scratched our head more than once, but there is simply no way to do it realistically. Not for us. Maybe IDC and those guys can afford to do that. But for us, quantifying cost of systems, we barely understand where they're installed and how they're used. That's very difficult to do. And if we just use catalog prices, I don't think that would work either. So unfortunately, as far as it comes to real cost, we are flying very blind. Yeah.
So I hear the word exponentially used often by people who have no idea what it means. It means something grew. But you continue, Erich, to have a straight line on a log linear plot, so that looks to me like a real exponential. Yeah, the lambda is less than it was during the heyday of the Moore's law era, but we're still seeing exponential growth.
It's still good. The last slide I showed, it's still exponential growth. I think this should actually work. It's still exponential growth. That's what I try to allude to, or what I try to. Well, I put a straight line there. You could put a curved line there, but the question becomes statistics. How statistically relevant is it? And I'm pretty sure, for instance, the red line, if I try to do a quadratic curve for that, or something like that, it's less statistic significant because it looks like a very straight curve. But straight curves on log linear plots are always very dangerous in terms of statistics and so on and so forth. Yeah. As Horst amply demonstrated by his bet and where he showed the slide I put up 14 years ago, right? So right now we still look like we are growing, but we are growing not nearly as fast as we used to. Yeah.
So we're actually out of time. But we can maybe
this is I wasn't sure. This is 6:30. I thought it was 6:45.
I think it's 6:30. Is it 6:05? 6:05. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Do we have one more question? Okay, let's take that.
Hi, so I'm still a student in the space, so I'm still kind of getting to grips with everything. But I found it interesting to see that we seem to have far less new computers coming into the space. So
Next question, please.
do you think we'll get to a point where our computing power is increasing at a rate where we no longer need to architect lots of new systems, but instead research can be focused more on just a few systems which are very capable to handle lots of different research projects? And ideally, we can almost save money by sticking to only a few systems where lots of people across countries or research centers have access to these, rather than each individual research center having their own supercomputer.
So I have a feeling it's actually going the other way. So in a market where performance improvements are not guaranteed or not easy to come by just by plugging in a new chip, the differentiating factor between companies becomes architecture. And the competitive advantage in the market becomes having an architecture which fits your applications well. That's why a lot of big companies, especially in AI space, but also in other spaces, they are doing their in-house development for their own cloud systems, and they don't intend to sell those systems. They just want to run them inside. So in a market environment where you have less easy growth, it might very much be you have much more specialized players, as long as if a market segment is large enough. But then there is a lot of computing going on where the market is not big enough to justify that. And for those, there would be probably more of a very few general architectures and programming towards those. So it could become very interesting in very different market corners. Yeah. To the point that for us, in terms of this project, it might become difficult to actually track all those corners. Yeah. And we see first examples of systems where we question that they can run LIMPAC, even though they're important systems in the AI space, right?
Thank you.
So we had a note from the the people in the back that.
It is,
we're
is
done.
indeed
We're done.
6:30.
Yeah, 6:30. Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I thought we get the room till 6:45. So with that, thank you very much again. If you have some other comments or questions, please come up. And thank you, and I hope to see you again next year.